In the vast expanse of space, orbiting a dying star, floated Nova Vanguard Academy, a gleaming fortress of steel and glass where cadets from across the galaxy trained to become warriors. It was a place where strength, speed, and intellect were prized above all else. Among the hundreds of students stood Lyra Solis, a young human who had earned more laughter than respect. To most, she was nothing more than a relic, an outdated species struggling to keep up in a universe dominated by advanced aliens and cybernetic enhancements. Lyra's day began like any other. She stepped into the training arena, her heart pounding as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Her classmates whispered behind their hands, their words sharp enough to cut. "Look at her," one said with a sneer. "She can barely hold that rifle." Another chimed in, louder this time. "Humans are so slow. Why is she even here?" Lyra clenched her jaw but said nothing. She'd learned early on that responding only made things worse. Today's exercise involved navigating an obstacle course while dodging simulated enemy fire. For Lyra, it felt like walking through quicksand. Every step seemed heavier than the last. When she stumbled over a low wall during the first phase, the room erupted in mocking laughter. Even Instructor Kale, a towering insectoid alien with shimmering green wings, clicked his mandibles disapprovingly. "Focus, Cadet Solis," he barked, "or you'll never survive out there." But then something strange happened. As Lyra scrambled to her feet, a red laser bolt shot toward her head. Without thinking, she twisted sideways, ducking just in time to avoid being hit. The movement was fluid, almost instinctual, unlike anything she'd practiced before. A second bolt came flying, and again, she sidestepped with unnatural precision. The crowd fell silent. Even Kale paused mid-stride, his antennae twitching in surprise. For a brief moment, Lyra forgot about the jeers and stares. She moved like water, weaving between obstacles and evading attacks with ease. Though she didn't complete the course perfectly, she tripped near the end and landed hard on her knees. Her performance left everyone stunned. Zixar, a hulking reptilian cadet known for his brute strength, muttered under his breath, "What was that?" Later, alone in her dorm room, Lyra replayed the scene in her mind. How had she done it? She wasn't particularly strong or fast. Most of her peers could run circles around her. Yet for those few seconds, she'd felt unstoppable, as if some hidden part of her brain had taken over. Curiosity gnawed at her. Was this something unique to humans, or had she simply gotten lucky? Determined to find answers, Lyra opened her tablet and began searching for information about humanity's role in galactic history. What she found shocked her. Centuries ago, before technology overshadowed biology, humans had been celebrated as natural strategists and fighters. Their adaptability and creativity had once made them feared opponents, but now those qualities were forgotten, buried beneath layers of prejudice and disdain. As Lyra scrolled through ancient texts and grainy videos, a spark ignited within her. Maybe she wasn't as weak as everyone thought. Maybe there was still power in being human, if only she could unlock it. Little did she know, her journey was just beginning. And soon, the entire academy would learn not to underestimate the quiet girl from Earth. That night, after the strange events in the training arena, Lyra couldn't sleep. Her mind buzzed with questions. How had she moved so quickly? What made her instincts sharper than usual? The answers felt like they were hiding just out of reach, teasing her. Determined to uncover the truth, she slipped out of her dorm room and into the dimly lit corridors of Nova Vanguard Academy. The Academy's library was a massive structure, its walls lined with glowing data panels and ancient scrolls preserved in stasis fields. Most cadets avoided it unless forced to study for exams. It was too quiet, too intimidating. But tonight, it was exactly where Lyra wanted to be. She navigated through rows of towering shelves until she reached a restricted section marked Archives of Extinct Civilizations. A small sign warned that unauthorized access was punishable by expulsion. Lyra hesitated for only a moment before swiping her ID card. To her surprise, the door hissed open. No alarms blared. No guards appeared. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and old metal, as if the room hadn't been disturbed in decades. Rows of holographic displays flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through files labeled Humanity, Pre-Galactic Era. At first, the information seemed mundane, details about Earth's geography, outdated technology, and primitive governments. But then she stumbled upon something extraordinary. Records describing humans as natural-born fighters. According to these documents, humanity's survival throughout history had depended not on superior strength or advanced weapons, but on their ability to adapt, think creatively, and act decisively under pressure. One entry caught her eye. Humans possess an innate capacity for improvisation, allowing them to overcome challenges without relying solely on external tools or enhancements. Another mentioned how human warriors once relied on intuition and teamwork rather than brute force. These qualities had earned them respect among other species, until time erased those memories. Lyra sat back, her heart racing. Could this explain what happened during the simulation? Was there something buried deep within her DNA, waiting to be awakened? She copied the files onto her tablet, careful not to leave a trace. As she left the archive, she resolved to test these theories herself. Over the next few nights, Lyra practiced in secret. She found an abandoned storage bay near the docking bays and turned it into her personal training ground. Using scraps of equipment left behind by maintenance crews, she set up makeshift obstacles. Then, she began experimenting with the techniques described in the archives. Simple movements designed to maximize agility and reflexes. At first, progress was slow. She tripped over crates, misjudged distances, and bruised her knees more times than she could count. But gradually, things started clicking. She learned to anticipate attacks instead of reacting blindly. She discovered how shifting her weight slightly could make her faster, lighter on her feet. Each success, no matter how small, fueled her determination. One evening, while practicing a particularly tricky dodge, she heard footsteps echoing outside the bay. Panic surged through her, and she ducked behind a stack of crates. Peering around the edge, she saw Commander Vela, one of the Academy's toughest instructors, standing in the doorway. The alien's sharp eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on the scattered equipment before moving on. For a moment, Lyra thought she'd been caught, but when Vela finally left, she realized something important. The commander hadn't looked angry or suspicious. Instead, there was curiosity in her gaze, a flicker of interest that gave Lyra hope. As she packed up her makeshift gear and returned to her dorm, Lyra felt a newfound confidence blooming inside her. Maybe humanity wasn't as obsolete as everyone believed. Maybe, just maybe, she could prove them all wrong. And she would start by showing them what it truly meant to fight like a human. The next morning, the Academy buzzed with anticipation. It was time for the monthly live fire drill, a high-stakes simulation designed to test cadets' combat readiness. For many, it was an opportunity to showcase their skills and climb the ranks. For Lyra Solis, however, it felt like stepping into the lion's den. She knew her classmates expected her to fail miserably, but deep down, she clung to the lessons she'd been practicing in secret. This was her chance to prove that humanity still had something valuable to offer. The drill took place in the combat dome, a massive arena filled with shifting terrain and holographic enemies programmed to mimic real adversaries. Cadets were paired off against each other, forced to navigate obstacles while avoiding enemy fire. Today, Lyra's opponent was none other than Zixar, a towering reptilian warrior whose scales shimmered under the artificial sunlight. Known for his brute strength and lightning-fast reflexes, Zixar had already earned a reputation as one of the Academy's top fighters. As they faced each other across the starting line, Zixar smirked, his forked tongue flicking out in amusement. "This won't take long," he growled, loud enough for nearby cadets to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lyra ignored them, focusing instead on steadying her breathing. Her heart pounded, but she reminded herself of what she'd learned from the archives. Humans thrived not by overpowering their enemies, but by outsmarting them. When the siren blared, signaling the start of the match, Zixar charged forward like a freight train. His movements were fast and powerful, leaving craters in the ground where his claws struck. Lyra dodged just in time, rolling to the side as his tail whipped past her head. The crowd gasped. No one expected her to avoid such a direct attack. Instead of engaging him head-on, Lyra darted toward the nearest obstacle, a crumbling stone wall. Using her agility, she leaped onto its edge and vaulted over, putting distance between herself and Zixar. He roared in frustration, smashing through the barrier moments later. But by then, Lyra was already weaving through the maze-like terrain, staying just out of reach. Zixar grew angrier with every missed strike. His attacks became wilder, less precise. Lyra used this to her advantage, baiting him into traps and forcing him to waste energy. Once, she lured him into a narrow corridor, where his bulk made it difficult to maneuver. As he struggled to turn around, she slipped past him, landing a well-aimed kick to his armored side. Though it didn't injure him, the blow stunned him momentarily, giving her precious seconds to regroup. The simulation dragged on longer than anyone anticipated. Most matches ended within minutes, but Lyra and Zixar were evenly matched, not because of raw power, but because of strategy. Lyra's quick thinking kept her alive, even as sweat poured down her face and her muscles screamed in protest. Finally, when the timer hit 0, the arena lights flashed green, signaling the end of the drill. Neither fighter had emerged victorious, but the result shocked everyone. Zixar stood panting, glaring at Lyra with a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. Around them, the crowd murmured in disbelief. No one had ever lasted so long against Zixar, not even some of the Academy's best cadets. Instructor Kale stepped forward, his mandibles twitching as he studied Lyra. "Cadet Solis," he said, his voice tinged with both surprise and curiosity. "You've demonstrated potential." It wasn't praise, exactly, but it was more acknowledgement than Lyra had ever received before. Later, as she walked back to her dorm, Lyra allowed herself a small smile. She hadn't won the match, but she'd proven something far more important. She wasn't the joke everyone thought she was, and if she could hold her own against someone like Zixar, there was no telling how much further she could go. For the first time since arriving at Nova Vanguard, Lyra felt like she belonged. The days following the live fire drill were a whirlwind for Lyra. Word of her unexpected performance against Zixar spread quickly through Nova Vanguard Academy, sparking both admiration and suspicion. Some cadets began to see her in a new light, whispering about how she might actually have potential. Others, however, refused to believe her success was genuine. "She got lucky," one muttered during lunch. "There's no way a human could keep up with us." Despite the mixed reactions, one person took notice in a way that changed everything. Commander Vela. The stern alien instructor, known for her unyielding standards and sharp tongue, summoned Lyra to her office later that week. When Lyra arrived, she found Vela seated behind a sleek desk, her piercing violet eyes fixed on her like twin lasers. "You've caused quite a stir, Cadet Solis," Vela said, leaning back in her chair. Her voice was calm but carried an edge that made Lyra straighten instinctively. "Tell me, how did you manage to hold your own against Zixar?" Lyra hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Should she mention the secret training sessions, the ancient archives? Before she could decide, Vela continued, "I've seen hundreds of cadets come through this academy, and none of them move the way you do. It's unconventional, but effective." There was a flicker of curiosity in her gaze, something Lyra hadn't expected from the notoriously stoic commander. Encouraged by the tone, Lyra spoke honestly. "I've been studying old combat techniques," she admitted, "from humanity's past. I think there's still value in them, if we adapt them properly." Vela raised an eyebrow. clearly intrigued. After a long pause, she stood and gestured for Lyra to follow. They walked together to a private training chamber, a smaller, more advanced version of the combat dome. Inside, holographic panels lined the walls, displaying complex battle scenarios. "Show me," Vela said simply, crossing her arms. For the next hour, Lyra demonstrated what she'd learned. She moved fluidly, using quick footwork and misdirection to evade simulated attacks. Though her movements weren't perfect, they were efficient, every step calculated, every dodge precise. Vela watched silently, her expression unreadable. Finally, when Lyra finished, the commander nodded slowly. "You're onto something," Vela said. "But raw talent isn't enough. If you want to survive out there, you'll need discipline and refinement." With that, she offered Lyra a rare opportunity: personal mentorship under her guidance. Over the next few weeks, Vela pushed Lyra harder than ever before. Training sessions became grueling tests of endurance, forcing Lyra to adapt to increasingly difficult challenges. One day, it was hand-to-hand combat against multiple opponents. The next, navigating treacherous terrain while solving tactical puzzles. Each exercise honed a different aspect of Lyra's skill set, turning her natural instincts into polished techniques. But not everyone was pleased with the arrangement. Jealous whispers grew louder among Lyra's peers. "She's getting special treatment," one cadet hissed during a group briefing. Another accused her of relying on outdated tricks instead of embracing modern technology. Even some instructors questioned whether Vela's decision was wise, arguing that humans simply didn't belong in elite combat roles. The criticism weighed heavily on Lyra. Late at night, after exhausting training sessions, she often lay awake wondering if she truly deserved the attention, or if she was just setting herself up for failure. During one particularly tough day, when a simulation left her battered and bruised, she confided in Vela. "I don't know if I can do this," Lyra admitted, her voice trembling. "Everyone thinks I'm a fraud." "Maybe they're right." Vela listened quietly, then leaned forward, her violet eyes locking onto Lyra's. "Let me tell you something," she said firmly. "When I first joined the academy, I faced the same doubts. My species wasn't taken seriously because of my gender. People laughed at me, told me I didn't belong. But I proved them wrong, not by conforming to their expectations, but by embracing who I am." Her words struck a chord deep within Lyra. For the first time, she realized that doubt wasn't unique to her, it was part of the journey. And maybe, just maybe, being underestimated was her greatest advantage. With renewed determination, Lyra threw herself back into training. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. As the semester progressed, Lyra's transformation became impossible to ignore. Under Commander Vela's relentless mentorship, she refined her skills with every passing day. Her movements grew sharper, her instincts keener, and her confidence stronger. Yet, despite her progress, whispers of doubt still lingered among her peers. Many refused to believe that a human could truly compete with the galaxy's finest warriors. That skepticism was about to be shattered. One crisp morning, the Academy announced a timed obstacle course challenge, a test designed to push cadets to their absolute limits. The course spanned nearly half a kilometer of grueling terrain, filled with hazards ranging from collapsing platforms to laser grids and automated drones programmed to attack on sight. It was notorious for its difficulty. Even the top cadets struggled to complete it within the allotted time. The record holder was Calthar, a legendary graduate whose name was etched into the Academy's Hall of Fame. His time, 5 minutes and 42 seconds, had stood unbroken for over a decade. When Lyra stepped up to the starting line, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Some cadets snickered openly, convinced she'd fail miserably. Others watched curiously, eager to see if the human underdog could live up to her growing reputation. Even Instructor Kale seemed skeptical, his mandibles clicking softly as he adjusted the simulation controls. The siren blared, signaling the start of the challenge. Lyra bolted forward, her heart pounding like a drum. She didn't hesitate at the first hurdle, a series of jagged rocks jutting out of the ground, but instead scaled them with practiced ease, using her momentum to leap across gaps. Behind her, holographic drones activated, firing red beams in rapid succession. Lyra twisted and ducked, weaving through the attacks with fluid precision. Next came the laser grid, a section infamous for catching cadets off guard. Thin beams of light crisscrossed the narrow pathway, forcing competitors to move with exact timing. Most cadets approached this part cautiously, inching their way through. But Lyra didn't slow down. Drawing on weeks of training, she sprinted headlong into the grid, her body contorting mid-stride to avoid the deadly lasers. The crowd gasped as she cleared the final beam, with barely an inch to spare. By now, sweat poured down her face, and her muscles burned with exhaustion. But Lyra refused to let fatigue slow her down. Ahead lay the most daunting obstacle, a rickety suspension bridge suspended over a simulated abyss. As she reached the midpoint, the bridge began to collapse, panels falling away beneath her feet. Without missing a beat, Lyra leaped onto the remaining planks, balancing precariously before launching herself toward solid ground. The final stretch was a straight sprint through a gauntlet of automated turrets. Their shots came fast and furious, but Lyra zigzagged unpredictably, making herself a difficult target. When she finally crossed the finish line, skidding to a halt just inches past the threshold, the arena erupted into stunned silence. Then, slowly, the scoreboard lit up. 5:38. Lyra had broken the record by 4 seconds. For a moment, no one moved. Cadets stared at the display, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Even Commander Vela, who rarely showed emotion, looked momentarily taken aback. Then applause broke out, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Zixar clapped begrudgingly, his expression unreadable, while others cheered loudly, their earlier doubts replaced by admiration. Later that evening, as Lyra sat alone in her dorm room, replaying the events in her mind, she felt a mix of pride and disbelief. She had done it, not because she was faster or stronger than everyone else, but because she had embraced her humanity. Her adaptability, creativity, and sheer determination had carried her through where brute force and advanced tech had failed others. But even as she celebrated her victory, Lyra knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Breaking records was one thing. Earning lasting respect was another. Still, for the first time since arriving at Nova Vanguard, she allowed herself to dream bigger. If she could conquer the obstacle course, what else might she achieve? And deep down, she vowed to keep proving, to herself and to the galaxy, that being human wasn't a weakness. It was her greatest strength. Lyra's record-breaking performance on the obstacle course should have been a moment of triumph, but envy has a way of festering in the shadows. As her name flashed across the Academy's leaderboards, whispers of resentment spread among her peers. Some admired her grit and determination, but others, those who had mocked her since day one, couldn't stomach the idea of a human outshining them. To them, Lyra's success was an affront to everything they believed about humanity's inferiority. Late one evening, as Lyra prepared for another training session, she noticed something odd about her combat suit. The sleek exoskeleton, designed to enhance speed and endurance, felt heavier than usual. At first, she dismissed it as fatigue from the previous day's exertion. But when she activated the suit's systems, warning lights blinked erratically on the HUD display. Alarmed, she ran diagnostics and discovered that several critical functions, shield modulation, joint stabilization, and even oxygen filtration, had been disabled. Her stomach churned with unease. This wasn't a malfunction. Someone had tampered with her gear. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Someone wanted her to fail, and not just fail, but suffer publicly. If she stepped into the upcoming team battle simulation wearing this compromised suit, she'd be putting herself and her teammates at risk. Determined not to let sabotage derail her progress, Lyra made a bold decision. She stripped off the damaged suit and resolved to compete without it. It was a risky move. Most cadets relied heavily on their suits to keep up with the demands of combat, but Lyra trusted her instincts. After all, hadn't she proven time and again that raw skill could overcome technological advantages? The next morning, the arena buzzed with anticipation. Today's challenge was a high-stakes team battle simulation, pitting squads of 5 against each other in a chaotic free-for-all. Lyra's team consisted of misfits and underdogs, cadets who, like her, had struggled to earn respect. They huddled briefly before the match began, exchanging nervous glances. "We're outnumbered and outgunned," muttered Rin, a wiry avian cadet with feathers ruffled in anxiety. "This is hopeless." "It's not over until it's over," Lyra replied firmly. "Stick close, follow my lead, and trust yourselves." When the siren blared, signaling the start of the match, chaos erupted. Enemy teams swarmed the battlefield, their enhanced suits giving them a clear advantage. Lyra's team found themselves cornered almost immediately, pinned down by relentless fire. Without her combat suit, Lyra was painfully aware of her vulnerability. Every movement required twice the effort. Every dodge left her breathless. Yet, she refused to panic. Using quick thinking, Lyra directed her team to take cover behind a cluster of overturned crates. From there, she orchestrated a series of daring maneuvers. When an enemy drone swooped low, she hurled a decoy device to draw its attention, allowing her teammates to flank their opponents. When a rival squad advanced with overwhelming force, she lured them into a narrow corridor where their numbers worked against them. Despite being outnumbered, Lyra's leadership turned the tide. Her team fought with newfound cohesion, executing strategies she called out in real time. By the time the timer hit 0, they emerged victorious, not because of superior firepower, but because of teamwork and ingenuity. Afterward, during a routine inspection of Lyra's damaged suit, Commander Vela uncovered evidence of deliberate tampering. Furious, she launched an investigation, vowing to hold the perpetrators accountable. For now, though, Lyra stood tall, her head held high. Once again, she had proven that resilience and resourcefulness could overcome even the most insidious attempts to bring her down. As the crowd dispersed, Zixer approached her, his expression unreadable. "You're tougher than you look," he admitted grudgingly. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. For Lyra, it was validation enough. She had faced sabotage and still risen above it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she could handle them, one step at a time. The investigation into the sabotage of Lyra's combat suits sent shockwaves through Nova Vanguard Academy. Rumors spread like wildfire, dividing the student body into factions. Some rallied behind Lyra, inspired by her resilience and determination to overcome such a blatant act of malice. Others accused her of orchestrating the sabotage herself, a desperate ploy for sympathy and attention. The tension simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. For Lyra, the days following the incident were emotionally draining. She tried to focus on her training, but it was hard to ignore the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. During meals in the cafeteria, groups of cadets would fall silent as she passed, their eyes darting away guiltily. Even some of her teammates, who had fought alongside her in the simulation, seemed hesitant to associate with her too closely, fearing they might become targets themselves. Amidst the chaos, Commander Vela remained steadfast in her support. "Ignore them," she told Lyra during one of their private sessions. "Their opinions don't define you. What matters is how you respond." Her words were meant to reassure, but Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that the academy itself was beginning to fracture under the weight of prejudice and jealousy. Then came news that struck a deeper chord. Earth, the last human colony, was under threat. A mysterious enemy force had been spotted near its borders, and intelligence reports suggested an imminent attack. For most cadets, this was little more than background noise. Humanity's struggles rarely registered on their radar, but for Lyra, it was personal. Earth wasn't just a distant planet. It was home. The thought of her people facing danger while she trained light years away filled her with a mix of guilt and urgency. Determined to channel her emotions into action, Lyra threw herself into even more rigorous training. She spent hours perfecting her techniques, pushing her body to its limits. At night, she studied tactical strategies, analyzing past battles, and learning from both victories and defeats. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Cadets who had once dismissed her now watched her with cautious respect, unsure whether to admire or resent her relentless drive. One evening, after an especially grueling session, Lyra found herself alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before her, beautiful yet daunting. She thought about Earth, so small and fragile compared to the sprawling galactic civilizations. Was humanity truly destined to fade into obscurity, or could they reclaim their place among the stars? Her musings were interrupted when Zixer joined her unexpectedly. The towering reptilian warrior stood awkwardly for a moment before speaking. "You're different," he said bluntly. "Most humans, they give up when things get tough. But you keep fighting." Lyra turned to face him, surprised by his candor. "It's not about being human or alien," she replied softly. "It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." Zixer nodded slowly, his golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "Maybe there's something to learn from your kind after all." Though his words were simple, they carried weight. Slowly but surely, Lyra was breaking down barriers, not just for herself, but for humanity as a whole. As she returned to her dorm that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she vowed to stand firm, not only for her own future but for the future of her species. The galaxy was watching, and Lyra Solis was ready to prove that humanity still had a role to play. The semester was drawing to a close, and with it came the Academy's most grueling test yet, the final combat simulation. This wasn't just another drill, it was a full-scale war scenario designed to evaluate every cadet's ability to lead, strategize, and survive under extreme pressure. Teams were randomly assigned, forcing cadets to work with classmates they might not trust or even like. For Lyra Solis, this meant stepping into unfamiliar territory once again. When the team assignments were announced, Lyra found herself leading a group of misfits. There was Rin, the anxious avian cadet who doubted his own abilities. Tikera, a stoic insectoid warrior with razor-sharp mandibles, but little patience for teamwork. Kalen, a tech-savvy cyborg whose reliance on data often made him indecisive in the heat of battle. And Zixar, the reptilian powerhouse who still viewed Lyra with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. None of them expected much from her leadership, and their body language said as much during their first briefing. "We're doomed," Rin muttered under his breath, earning a sharp glare from Tikera. "She'll get us all killed." Lyra ignored the comment and focused on the mission briefing projected before them. Their objective was clear: infiltrate an enemy stronghold, disable its defenses, and secure a vital piece of intel, all while evading relentless eye-controlled adversaries. It was a task that required precision, coordination, and trust, qualities her team sorely lacked. "Listen up," Lyra said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I know we're not the strongest or the fastest team here, but if we stick together and play to our strengths, we can win this." She outlined a plan, assigning roles based on each member's unique abilities. Rin would handle reconnaissance, using his agility to scout ahead. Tikera would serve as the frontline defender, shielding the group from enemy fire. Kalen would manage communications and hack into enemy systems, while Zixer provided brute force when needed. As for Lyra, she positioned herself as the strategist, coordinating their movements and adapting on the fly. The simulation began with a deafening siren, plunging the arena into chaos. Enemy drones swarmed overhead, firing indiscriminately, while automated turrets lined the battlefield. Most teams charged forward recklessly, relying on sheer firepower to break through. But Lyra's team moved differently. They advanced cautiously, sticking to cover and communicating constantly. At one point, disaster struck. A hidden minefield detonated beneath them, injuring Tikara and scattering the group. Panic threatened to take hold, but Lyra kept her cool. Rin flanked left. Kaelin patched Tikara's suit. She barked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Her quick thinking saved them from further casualties, and they regrouped moments later, battered but determined. As they neared the stronghold, the final challenge awaited. A heavily fortified gate guarded by elite AI units. Other teams had already fallen trying to breach it. Lyra studied the layout carefully, then turned to her teammates. "We can't overpower them," she said. "But we don't need to. We outsmart them." Using Kaelin's hacking skills, they created a diversion, luring the guards away from the gate. Meanwhile, Zixer smashed through a weak point in the wall, allowing the team to slip inside unnoticed. Once inside, Lyra guided them through a maze of traps and ambushes, her instincts keeping them one step ahead of danger. When the timer finally hit 0, signaling the end of the simulation, Lyra's team stood victorious. The only squad to complete the mission without losing a single member. The arena erupted in cheers, even from rival cadets who couldn't deny the brilliance of their strategy. Commander Vela approached, her violet eyes gleaming with pride. "You've done more than prove yourself, Cadet Solus," she said. "You've reminded us all what true leadership looks like." For Lyra, the victory was bittersweet. She had earned the respect of her peers, but the looming threat to Earth weighed heavily on her mind. Still, as she looked at her team, once fractured, now united, she felt a flicker of hope. If humanity could adapt and persevere, maybe there was still a place for them among the stars. The aftermath of the final combat simulation rippled through Nova Vanguard Academy like a tidal wave. Lyra's team, once dismissed as a ragtag group of misfits, had emerged victorious against overwhelming odds. Their success wasn't just a personal triumph for Lyra. It was a testament to unity, creativity, and trust in the face of adversity. For the first time, cadets from different species began to see one another not as rivals or inferiors, but as potential allies. In the days leading up to graduation, the academy buzzed with newfound energy. Cadets who had once mocked Lyra now approached her with questions about her strategies. "How did you keep your team together?" asked a young amphibian cadet during a tactical seminar. "What made you choose those roles for them?" Lyra smiled, humbled by their curiosity. She explained how she had focused on each member's strengths rather than dwelling on their weaknesses, a lesson she herself had learned through trial and error. But it wasn't just admiration that followed Lyra. It was respect. Zixar, who had spent months ridiculing her, became an unexpected advocate. During a heated debate in the mess hall over humanity's relevance in modern warfare, he silenced his peers with a simple statement. Lyra proved that strength isn't always about power. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to step back and let others shine. Even Instructor Kale, whose skepticism toward humans had been unwavering, seemed to soften. After observing Lyra mentor younger cadets during training sessions, he nodded approvingly. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than I assumed," he admitted grudgingly. It wasn't high praise, but coming from him, it meant everything. As graduation day approached, Lyra was chosen to deliver the valedictorian speech, an honor traditionally reserved for non-human graduates. The news sent shockwaves through the academy, sparking both celebration and controversy. Some argued that tradition should remain unchanged, while others insisted that Lyra's achievements warranted recognition. In the end, Commander Vela intervened, her decision final. "Tradition exists to guide us," she said firmly, "but progress demands we adapt." On the morning of the ceremony, Lyra stood before the assembled crowd, her heart pounding. Rows of cadets, humans, aliens, cyborgs, and hybrids watched intently as she stepped up to the podium. Behind her loomed the vast expanse of space, a reminder of the infinite possibilities ahead. "Today," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "we stand united, not because we are perfect, but because we have learned to embrace our differences. Each of us brings something unique to this galaxy. Strength, intelligence, resilience. They come in many forms, and none is greater than the other. Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from even the most skeptical listeners. She spoke of the challenges they would face beyond the academy, the wars, the alliances, the sacrifices, and urged them to remember the lessons they had learned here. "We cannot fight alone," she said. "Our survival depends on cooperation, empathy, and courage. Together, we can build a future worth fighting for." Applause erupted as she finished, echoing off the walls of the grand hall. Even those who had doubted her rose to their feet, moved by the sincerity in her voice. For a brief moment, the divisions between species faded, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Yet, as the celebrations unfolded, Lyra received troubling news. Intelligence reports confirmed that the mysterious enemy force near Earth was closer than anticipated, and growing bolder. Her victory at the Academy felt hollow compared to the looming threat facing her people. That night, standing alone in the observation deck, Lyra gazed at the stars. Graduation marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty and danger. But as she thought about the bonds she had forged and the battles she had fought, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Earth needed her. Humanity needed her. And no matter what lay ahead, Lyra Solis was ready to answer the call. Graduation day dawned bright and clear, the artificial sunlight of Nova Vanguard Academy casting a golden glow over the ceremony grounds. Cadets lined up in crisp uniforms, their faces a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. Among them stood Lyra Solis, her human form dwarfed by towering aliens and gleaming cyborgs, yet radiating a quiet strength that commanded attention. Today marked not just the end of her training, but the beginning of her journey to defend Earth, and perhaps the galaxy itself. As Commander Vela called each graduate forward to receive their commission, Lyra's mind raced with memories of how far she'd come. From being ridiculed as a relic of an outdated species to earning the rank of valedictorian, her path had been anything but easy. But every challenge, the sabotage, the doubts, the battles, had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. When her name was announced, the crowd erupted into applause. Lyra stepped forward, her boots clicking softly against the polished floor, as she accepted her insignia, a silver badge engraved with the emblem of the Intergalactic Defense Force. She felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was proof that humanity still had a place among the stars. Her speech followed, delivered with the same passion and conviction that had inspired her peers during the final exam. "We are not defined by where we come from," she said, her voice carrying across the assembly. "We are defined by what we choose to do, with our skills, our courage, and our unity. Out there, beyond these walls, lies a universe full of challenges, but if we face them together, there is nothing we cannot overcome." The words resonated deeply, drawing cheers from cadets of all species. Even those who had once doubted her now looked at her with newfound respect. Zixar clapped loudly, his golden eyes gleaming with admiration, while Rin wiped away tears of pride. For the first time in centuries, humanity was seen not as obsolete but as essential, a vital thread in the tapestry of galactic cooperation. After the ceremony, Lyra boarded the transport ship bound for Earth, her heart heavy with both excitement and dread. The enemy force threatening her homeworld remained shrouded in mystery, its motives unclear. Intelligence reports hinted at advanced technology and ruthless tactics, leaving little room for optimism. Yet, as Lyra strapped herself into her seat and gazed out the viewport at the receding academy, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. Her classmates, her friends, were scattered across the galaxy, stationed on ships, outposts, and colonies, ready to defend their respective corners of space. And though they hailed from different worlds, spoke different languages, and bore different strengths, they shared one common goal: protecting the future. As the ship entered hyperspace, Lyra opened the files she had copied from the archives months ago. Humanity's history was filled with stories of resilience, ingenuity, and triumph against impossible odds. Those qualities hadn't disappeared. They were alive within her, waiting to be unleashed. The journey ahead would be perilous. Battles would rage, sacrifices would be made, and losses would sting deeply. But Lyra knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't fight alone. Together with her comrades, she would stand firm, not just for Earth, but for every species united under the banner of peace. When the ship finally descended toward Earth's surface, Lyra pressed her hand against the cool glass of the viewport. Below her stretched the blue-green planet she called home, a fragile jewel suspended in the vastness of space. It was worth fighting for, worth dying for, and as long as she drew breath, she vowed to protect it. For Lyra Solis, this wasn't the end of her story, it was only the beginning.